Welcome to the third part of this five-part series that I'm calling Fundamental Principles of Syntropic Agroforestry. Today I'll be talking about productive principles. So if you remember, first video I've given an overview. Second video we've talked about the regenerative principles. And so on this third one we're gonna be looking at things that we have a little bit more control. It's more of a micro side of the equation. And for those that haven't watched the first video, I highly recommend to watch before this one, just so you understand where does that fit in the bigger picture. But also in saying that, this is a standalone self-supporting video as well. So stay with me and let's see where we will get. Alright, so today I'll talk about those three principles, so biodiversity, dynamic and process-based that I presented on that first video. So let's start with biodiverse. Some people might say, oh, but biodiversity is kind of a given. It's kind of a regenerative process too, and I'll definitely agree with that. It is indeed. But in our systems, we have to be very careful in how we select the biodiversity. And I'm talking more plants here, in the plant realm. We really need to be aware that the different plants will do different jobs. So there is really a polarity that we have to consider between quality and the quantity of biodiversity. And by that I mean, are we looking at the quantity of species or are we looking at the quality of plant families? We also need to look what kind of roles do we want that diversity to play, or which plants gonna be playing more a regen kind of work or a service type of work, which is gonna be more on the productive side. Is there any that does both? And if so, how are we gonna deal with that dual purpose, because it can cause problems in our systems, in our management, especially when we are looking, this banana, if I just wait a little bit more for it to produce, but then things might start to get a little bit clogged up. So also we gotta be looking in a macro picture, what kind of relationships are we gonna have with our fauna, be it macrofauna, be it our cattle if that's what we're gonna have, or be it with our soil biology, which is very, very important, and the insect population, which really is the animals that bring movement to the plant, that really helps plants not only to pollinate, but to bring a whole range of nutrients and messages and things like that, because as we all know, plants can't move. Also, we might be looking at some specific plants that have a particular ability with, chemical and physical processes in our soil. They might be able to remove some toxicity from the soil, might be able to accumulate a particular nutrient. So we gotta be looking at the ecophysiological aspects of those plants. And also one thing that people don't really pay too much attention is what's the plant's gestures. If a plant grows like this, or if a plant grows like that, or like this, where are we going to be putting them in the systems, and how can we then optimize photosynthesis? So that is, biodiversity is a beautiful word, but it comes with a lot of, nuances that it needs to work, because we're now talking about a productive system, and we need to be able to do what? We need to be able to manage those systems properly. So the biodiversity that we're going to be bringing into our systems is highly management dependent. And people tend to say, oh, the more the better, the more biodiversity the better. And I agree to a certain extent, as long as you can manage. Because if you start to bring plants that the times that they require to be managed might impact on your production, or might impact on the general flow of the system, or if it's a plant that just grows too much for your time management, or it's a plant that runs around. So it's really, really management dependent on how we're going to bring those plants in. And that will then also be influenced by what kind of tools have you got, what kind of technology have you got access to, or that it's even available. What kind of skills do you have? Does the people that work for you have? And that's a massive issue, because it's not easy to get qualified labor. That then it starts to impact on the economic viability of our forests. and also what kind of time have we got. If it's a really big area and you're only showing up once every 6 months, then the plants that we're going to have to choose will have to conform with that management regime. We also need to understand the scales of complexity, because again, the bigger we go, then that complexity must be reduced. Otherwise, the management needs of that is just going to be way too far. And the more subsistence or the more kind of backyard-ish we move, then the more complexity we are able to bring it in and manage, which make our system a lot more powerful and a lot more resilience too. So it's that trade-off between power, resilience, but also ability to manage. Too much power can't handle the management, we got a problem. Not enough power, then we also have a problem, because then we have a sluggish kind of system. So we're always going to have to be marrying those qualitative and quantitative aspects at all times. Obviously, the more industrial we'll become, then that biodiversity will becoming less and less. But we can never go back into a monoculture or even a dual culture. We do need, in my thinking, in my experience, at least 4 or 5 plant families for each successional stage, just so we are able to really foster the biology in the ground and the biology above ground, that macro and microfauna, to really keep our system moving forward, be able to decompose the excess organic matter that we generate, be able to release sugars, be able to have all those powerful interactions that a syntropic system is able to provide. It's kind of really the key of the system. We also need to look into access. Some people will have more access to biodiversity, to seeds, to seedlings, to cuttings. What kind of resources do I have? What can I get? Do I have time? Because if I have time on my hand, then it's much, with a lower investment, I'm able then to propagate things by myself and slowly increase. And to me, that's usually how I tell my students to go about. To go slowly, because in that slower process you also start to understand what works and what doesn't, and what plants you like to work, or what plants are just too powerful for you, or just doesn't perform in your soil because of whatever reason, or climate and variations. Also looking, do we actually have suppliers, our local suppliers, to give us those plants, or are we buying them from eBay? Are we buying them from overseas? And if so, where are they coming from, and how good would they be in that translation, in that adaptation to our local climate? And of course, scale will also be, compounding that issue. The bigger the thing, the bigger the investment, the further away most likely we're going to be going for resources. And the last bit is we also have to consider a very powerful part in our systems, which is, biodiversity tends to also emerge from itself. And we must allow that to happen, because it's almost, in my experience, it's almost impossible for you to design and have every single step in succession, every single term in strata, from day 0 to, to year 35. And I don't think we have to go there. Of course, our initial setup needs to be really strong, really powerful, so things move. But the plants that we're going to be managing in 30 years, most likely they will be brought into the system. The later succession, the climax species or the late secondary species, we have to trust that through a number of mechanisms, be through soil disturbance, be through biological or fauna, all those processes, be wind bringing seeds or rain and a bit of water movement, they will be bringing more and more of that diversity into our systems. And we need to then be careful to not just get rid of those plants that we might not be familiar with, and really have a keen eye to understand those interactions. So to me, biodiversity in a bigger picture, in our translation into a productive system, really has to do with the design. How are we going to design our systems? It's really very, very, very key part. It's not the most important part, but it's a very, very key step and to give us confidence that we actually had a look at the bigger picture and also at the small picture, and hopefully there is a movement, there is a conversation between the small and the bigger picture, so we then can go ahead with some kind of certainty. It's never 100% sure, but there is some kind of certainty that we've done our homework and our systems are likely to move forward in one way or another. All right, so here we now go into what Ernest calls, our agroforest must be dynamic. And what is that? To me, dynamic is a system that is always in motion. So there is always movement in that process. And that is highly important when we're looking about production. Because yes, there we always have motion in our regenerative forests, but if we want production, then we must be managing it. We must be adding movement. We must be really allowing it to expand and then contracting it so it can expand again. And basically that's, in my thinking, in my understanding from what I've observed and talk about, this is the cat's jump. And that's a Brazilian expression to kind of mean that take the productive power of our systems to the next level. So basically the cat jumps to the next level in our productivity. So we must have lots of plants in our systems which are not our productive plants, that will allow us to be introducing lots of movements and contractions and extension, and really giving us options to play with with life, because that's all about being resilient in a time that is kind of a little bit tricky. But that dynamic movement is not just, oh, let's just go and smash things up and blah, blah, blah. No, we need to have a very timely disturbance. It's all about coming and disturbing the system, because usually through disturbance we are able to optimize the flowering processes. We kind of induce a little bit of stress by bringing too much light into the system, and then plants just react, and then we have a nice flowering processes, especially in our lower strata plants, who a lot of them have evolved in a system that has those contractions and expansive cycles. So we need to be able to pay attention onto that. Also, by doing it, we got plants that will start to want to regrow, and by doing that they're going to release sugars and hormones, and really going to instigate the biology in the soil to get moving again a little bit quicker. And guess who's going to benefit from those interactions? Our productive plants. So that's really part of the game, how we get these things moving. But is it really just a matter of we come and chop and drop as it's usually perceived? To me, it's far away from chop and dropping. To me, chop and drop is a lose-lose process. One, because if we're simply going to go and chop, like we got that circular oak coming up here, you probably can't see. If I'm just going to go and chop my service plants, that means that I'm not even paying attention of who they are, what they need, and how can I minimize the wound so it can recover as quickly as possible. So we are actually doing, slowing down the system if we just chop. And on the other side of the equation, if we just simply get something and drop, then again, we are actually not optimizing our decomposition. We are not organizing the organic matter where it really needs to be powerful, to then reduce perhaps our management, or to feed the plants that we really want to feed. So to me, chop and drop needs to go into a next level of consciousness, really. We gotta go into prune and organize. Or if we're using animals to manage, it's about, eating and pooping. And that is such a different quality in the process of our management. And that's actually where, in my thinking and understanding, that's where the economic issues are starting to arise. Because chopping and dropping can just be done rather quick, but once you start to go into prune and organize, now we start to take a lot more time and a lot more care. And not only we need more specialist tools, but we also need a labor force that is willing to actually interact with those plants at an individual level. So there is a whole range of issues. That is my understanding. That's where Ernest is putting a lot of his attention into developing appropriate machinery that can do this job efficiently, but don't lose the quality. And it's still, it's still a big puzzle to be solved there on how we're gonna do that. And in my systems, which tends to be a lot more into the subsistence, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of attention, it's a lot of observation, not only when we do it, but also afterwards. So that dynamic quality, the dynamic principle that we must apply if we want to have production, it's much less important if we're only thinking about regen. It's ideally we are moving our regenerative systems too, but to be productive, this is the catch jump. It's as simple as that. So that also gives us a little bit of a power into speeding up the process or slowing it down. It's not really, it doesn't really put a brake. I mean, the brake is the let's say the lack of acceleration. But just like in our cars, when we gotta be confident and we gotta know what we're doing. If we're just gonna, step on that pedal and go full throttle, what's gonna move? How is that system gonna bounce back? Is it the right time? Are we speeding up on a tight corner when it's raining? Or are we speeding up, when conditions are right? So we gotta be looking at the macrocosmic picture as well, into the weather patterns, into how is the vigor of those plants, what are we doing here? Because we can, by trying to speed up too much, get things a lot too far out of shape. Then the recovery, the bouncing back into this growth phase and productive phase can be really sluggish. And then on top of that, we get perhaps a little bit of an unfavored climate, like we all been experiencing lately, I'm sure. Then things can really start to look bad. So experience is really paramount. Just for us in our cars, how we're going to drive, it's really important. But that's here is when we start to go, how is that system breathing? Is it breathing in? Is it breathing out? How are we moving it? To me, it's the art of our agroforestry system. Is something that is really individual on how you like to work, how your land responds, how your plant responds, how your climate supports or does not support. It's really, really a special part, which, to me is 100% based on observation. So it's very difficult to make good decisions in bringing dynamic into our systems if we are making decisions from the office, if we are making decisions based on the spreadsheet, if we are making decisions based on our design. All of those tends to create a lot of problems. We must, and again, that's another problem into our bigger economic processes, economic systems, where the person in charge and all the labor force, they must be observing. They have to be observing and communicating with the plants, communicating with the people to go, are you noticing this is changing, this is slowing down, is it time to open up, what's the weather looking, blah, 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 bringing all of those variables together to really keep that system performing. So we also need to look into our intuition, our experience, and look, most often enough, we gotta be playing. We gotta be looking into, how I'm gonna research here. I'll do one patch like that and another like that. So it's a lot about taking notes and going, observing how things are moving. So over the years, we start to get a lot more experience on how we're gonna be dealing with that process. It's like the holistic management always says, you cannot judge a paddock from the outside. You gotta be in there, you gotta be looking down, you gotta be looking sideways, you gotta be looking up, you gotta be, how is this plant interacting with that plant? And this one there and that one. So we really need to be moving into the micro process, into this plant, how does it need to be treated, but also stepping back up and going, how is this relationship in that line? And then we go further into how is this line related to the bigger system and other systems, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. But we must have that movement that we go in and out. If we just stay out, we have a problem, and the other way around too. If we only stay in, we also have a problem. So it's really, we are the elements that are finding the balances within this process, which is the management process, which is basically as Ernest says, as from my experience, it's 95. It's actually, for me, it's 99.999% of our systems. It's all about this. If we want to have production, if we want to focus more on regen, then it's probably not so 100% management. It will be more, maybe a 50-50 by having a good species selections and letting things flow a bit more. But for production, this is it. This is where we're really going to get. But we need to have the power of that diversity, so we have tools, we have options. It's all about having options in my thinking, having options to make it move when it needs to move, even if it's just a little tweak, even if it's just thinning some of the eucalyptus, or just really having options. All right, so the last one, as you see, we are coming down, from that macro picture, biodiversity. Now it's human interaction, and now we go into the last principle, as far as I understand, in Syntropic Agroforestry, where we are looking at something that is process-based. So when you say process-based, does that mean that we cannot bring any internal inputs? That's a question that people often ask. So I can't bring fertilizer, no irrigations, no this, no that. And my answer to that, if you're going to compare the purist view of that, is like no external inputs, no fertilizer, no irrigation. But to me, that is not how I play the game. To me, I have to be real. To me, I'm a realist. It really depends on what we want to achieve and how fast we want to move. But we have to really understand what are those external inputs doing in our system. Sure, they are bringing some power to move forward, but are we going to run out of path soon after? And if we are, then we might be creating a problem. So we really have to understand, okay, so we're looking at external inputs to increase nutrients, to facilitate the water flow, to optimize community dynamics, to look at, how the energy is flowing. That's great. So I usually do that, especially on the beginning of the process, implement a really good bed, fluffy, deep, put a bit of fertilizer because I want to bring a bit of vegetables and a bit of production early on, because that's important, because they bring my attention into that system. But after that initial input, I back off, and then I start to work a lot more with processes. If you do have an economic interest, then you might be looking a bit more supplementing nutrition, but you gotta really observe what is that gonna do down the line. So I see a really strong polarity here, where we have the need for economic return, but we also have the need for regeneration. And for me, I think I've said that before, Syntropic Agroforestry is really a regenerative method that allows for production rather than a productive method that fosters regeneration. And my thinking behind that is that, yes, I get it, that to be regenerative, it needs to be economic. But for me, in a very short future, to me, already in the present, to be economic, it has to be regenerative. Look at all of our productive systems. They're just not economic. They are all living either through direct subsistence from governments, or they are just spreading the cost of their production to every single human. So they are actually not economical. And those systems, they do bring all of the externalities into themselves. So it is about regeneration. And then if we work with regeneration and start to then get some productivity down the track, those systems will become so productive without the need of any external inputs. And I can see here in this place, 4 years down the track, very little inputs, and things are really starting to move quick. And it's just super exciting. All right, so in terms of external input, we also need to bring a lot of inner inputs. That's, to me, how we're gonna balance, by removing that part of the equation, we need to bring something else into the equation. So it's not as simple, we remove that and all I gotta do is put some seeds on the ground and things will be fine. No, There is a clear exchange for me here where, we reduce external inputs, but we have to what? We have to lift our knowledge, we gotta lift our experience, we gotta participate, and we really have to learn how to make decisions based on today's sunshine, on today's weather, on what's today conducive for our actions. So that takes a lot of participation for us to be managing and be able to bring that power into the equation. We gotta bring our inner life into our forests. It's pretty much as simple as that. We have to participate. No participation, then we're gonna keep bringing external inputs because we're gonna keep missing the target because nature is moving. Nature is all about movement. There is one law in nature that I understand, and that law is it's forbidden to repeat. So if we understand that, if it is forbidden for us to repeat what we do, then we must be present every day with a fresh mind and understanding today as today, which means the only day in my understanding. All right, so now we have a problem here, not a problem, but something that we must consider, which is, what is the difference between an outcome and a process consciousness? And that's something that it's really ingrained in our society because we are all geared, our conscious, our will to move is really focused on what am I going to get out of that movement. So it's really focused on the outcome, what I'm going to get out. And in that system, it's not so much what I'm going to get out, but it's am I enriching life? Because if I am enriching life, then I will get something out in terms of production. If I'm not, if I'm just looking at the outcome, at the production, then we're going to have problems. And I've been there and I've seen others going there where they start, really philosophical and really engaging into the regen, into the process, but soon enough, through economic decisions or through a lack of outcome, and that's in the subsistence system too, to a lack of production, we start to simplify, we start to cut corners, we start to move in ways that the system will start to get weaker and weaker and weaker. And once we realize that, it's almost like a reset. We gotta go back and start that process again because we moved out of the living realm and we started to take a lot out of that system, and that system was not yet ready to give that much. So to me, the question to you is, what happens if you eat or if you sell all of your placenta? Your embryonic forest will not be developed well, and you will have some chronic diseases and some chronic problems down the line because of that. So we gotta be very careful on how we manage those things. We gotta really be observing what's happening now and how can I increase both the quality and the quantity of life in our systems. So then to me it becomes much more a question of when or how to do things rather than what needs to be done. And again, that's a shift in consciousness because the timing of when things get done, it's very important, but also how are we doing it. To me, a simple example is, all that effort that Ernest is going through on how can we develop machinery that cuts grass that has a clean cut. And that clean cut is then distributed. And also the next stage is, when are we cutting that grass? So we then keep, we go back into that planting water famous phrase, which is all about the timing on how we interact. So we are optimizing that water to stay in the system and interacting, those plants interacting with the biology in the soil to keep that water cycle moving. So we are cutting grasses in a way that their recovery is as fast as possible. So how are we going to be pruning those trees and when are we going to be doing it? It's very, very important in this system. So again, we're looking at processes, not outcomes. So we're looking at how can we keep things moving to optimize photosynthesis. That is the game. And also trigger some flowering processes and production. This is pretty simple. So to me then, we really need to trust. We need to trust not only the natural world and the natural processes and the natural flows, but we gotta trust ourselves that we are able to manage, and that it is possible to have a dialogue with our systems on how we're gonna be conducing them. And it's really trusting that I don't know, but also that I will know when I need to know. So it's not letting go of the control, but it's really going, look, there is no way of controlling this. It has to be a living dynamics. It has to be me and my system working together, and finding when things are getting a bit tense and then releasing the tension and just moving about, because we have a common goal. A common goal of evolving, of differentiating, of prospering. That is, we share that same thing. So we have to learn to talk to each other and trust each other and really step into a place where we just don't know tomorrow. And in my thinking and my experience, that's the only way to move forward, because really, we just don't know tomorrow. We have all this technology that keeps telling us if it's going to be raining, if it's going to be cold, if it's going to be that. And we all know that. The reality is that tomorrow is a new day. And all the thought processes that we had before kind of needs to stop and allow that day to be what it wants to be. So we have to allow our systems to be what it wants to be. So really, to me, just as a summary of that process base, to me this is all about our mindset. So it's all about how we approach our systems, what's the intention behind it, what's the language that we use. It's very different to say, I'm just gonna go and chop some eucalyptus, or I'm gonna go and manage my eucalyptus. You're gonna have very different results. And I invite you to do that. Go out into your systems, or go out in the day with, I'm just gonna do that, or I'm gonna engage with the process. You're gonna have a very different day, because if you are willing to just engage in the process, your day becomes much nicer and calmer and flowable, if that's a word. Whereas if you go, I'm just gonna do that, and we just keep hitting the walls one after another. So yeah, well, I think I've spoken long enough today again. As you see, it's simple, but it's complex. There's quite a few little things we gotta be thinking about. And look, if that's the level of understanding, the level of complexity, the depth of knowledge and practice that you want to go to, then I really invite you to come and check it out, my website, syntropicghana.com. I do offer a number of courses there and other opportunities for us to interact and deepen the knowledge, because to me, that's the beauty. That's the game. There is never a dull moment in our systems. And yeah, that's the power of regen, a productive regen. Once again, if you got any questions, please let me know. Send me an email or just write a comment here on YouTube. And yeah, if anything I've said did not make sense, please shout that out as well. If I've missed something that in your experience it's important, let me know. If I overstated any of those, please, let's talk, let's communicate. Because the more we talk, the more we share the reality of our systems, the reality of our experience, then I think the better for everybody. All right, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Next time is gonna be all about the human being. To me, this is the missing link in our productive systems, is how our system can become a reflection of ourselves. Take it easy, great to see you.